Okay, welcome back to the Uneducated PT podcast. Today we have Matt Jones coming on to talk about all things in terms of running or runners or in people inspired to maybe become runners and some of the kind of pitfalls and mistakes that they might make. So we're going to go into all of that and we're going to extract as much knowledge as we can out of Matt. But before we get into that, will you, Matt, just start by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, about the work you do and how you came to getting into this role or into this job?
Firstly, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. I think I'm sure we'll get into it, but I'm sure we met, I think, 4 or 5 years ago under the same mentor, and we've been following each other since then. So yeah, thanks for having me. Um, so yeah, I'm Matt. I'm from Cardiff, so from a little town in South Wales, and essentially 13 years ago I became a PT. So I've been in the fitness industry for about 13 years now. Um, Worked predominantly with strength and conditioning to start with, then went into more of your fat loss. That was very much my specialized niche for a number of years. As a lot of people did in lockdown, I think we had a look at what we could offer people, and that changed from home. And yeah, I essentially turned the business into a bit of a running based business, which is now founder of Run Strong Academy, which is a run club that we run as a course. But I work with a lot of runners online, with run coaching and specifically strength coaching for runners. And that's pretty much where the business lies at the moment.
Tell me a little bit about your own running journey. Why are you so passionate about that and helping people to get into running?
I've always loved running. I wasn't the type of person. I know there was many, which is great, that found running in lockdown. I've definitely been a runner pretty much all my life. I used to do a lot of sprinting, used to do a lot of team sports with football and rugby. So you have to run with that. My background is in sprinting. Long story short, applied for the Royal Marines when I was sort of 3 years into the fitness industry. I applied for the Royal Marines. And I got in, which was a year-long process, knowing that I was applying for the hardest military training in sort of British NATO. I think I realized that I needed to change from being a sprinter to the longer distances because of the tests that they were doing. So I was kind of forced to then do more long distance stuff, which I absolutely hated. Anything more than like 400 meters, I was genuinely like, no. It felt horrible when I first started, but to pass one of the tests, it was you needed to run 1.5 miles in under 10 minutes, which is shifting. So I knew I needed to be able to run 1.5 miles in that time just to get in. And I knew when I was in, there was obviously going to be more tests that were longer endurance based. And that's when I found longer runs than 400 meters anyway.
What was that your main run when you were doing short distance sprints? Was it 400 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters?
It was
All of
ones and
them?
twos. Yeah, 100 and 200 meters. 400 meters is probably the worst distance in the world, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
to sprint for 400 meters or to try to sprint for 400 meters is honestly disgusting.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, ones and twos.
And I think a lot of people who might not be experienced runners, they probably can't wrap that concept around that. Like it's a completely different ball game. Someone who's going from like doing 100 meters, 200 meters to then someone doing long distance running. It's a completely different sport.
Yeah, and I get a lot of people, that reach out to me in the same boat and they say, look, my background's in sprinting, and it's honestly harder to take someone from having a sprinting background to longer distances than it would be if they just had no background in running whatsoever.
Why do you think that is?
It's just the mechanics. I think with sprinting, especially if you've done it at even a half decent level, you're told to get out the blocks and give it some beans. So I think when you go into distance running, the worst thing you could probably do is open the door, get out, and give it some beans.
Mm,
So I think it's harder from a mechanical standpoint because the way you sprint is going to be different to the way you run 5K.
yeah.
And from a mental perspective, they've got it ingrained in the fact that they just need to run hard.
Mm.
which is gonna throw you under the bus if you try and run a 5K hard from the start for sure.
Which is probably a mistake a lot of beginners make as well as trying to just go as quick as they can.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so did you then stay in there after the training, or what happened next?
Yeah, so when I applied, I had a girlfriend at the time. And when I applied, she wasn't pregnant. 8 months into the application, she fell pregnant, which was amazing. And that was my firstborn. So when my boy was 2 months old is when I went into recruit training. I could have either not gone into recruit training and maybe regretted not going in and trying it, or I could have gone in, see how it goes with having a newborn at home. Yeah, and being mid 20s, I was a lot different to a lot of the boys that were in their, early 20s, come straight out of college, had no responsibilities. I had a newborn at home, and yeah, I just made the decision to come out because even though I loved it, I loved the training especially, and loved the sort of camaraderie and the lads. It just wasn't what I wanted to be as a dad for sure. So
Makes
I
sense.
I came out. Don't regret going in, but certainly don't regret coming out.
Yeah, I went through the exact same process, obviously for different reasons as well, where I was in recruit training in the Irish Defence Force, and I absolutely loved the training. I loved running around the barracks, full weighted and stuff like that. I was the fastest in the company of like 100 recruits, and they all loved me there. And I did like, I think I was about 9, 10 weeks in, nearly finishing, but things went on at home, and my mum got sick, and I was like, you know what, I would rather be at home right now than doing this. And then that obviously led me into then the fitness industry. After that, I did like I worked as a metal sheet worker, and I did a couple of jobs in between, but then it was like, oh, I thought that was going to be the job for me, that was going to be the career that I wanted, and I was fully sure of it. And then when it didn't happen, I was like, oh, now what do I do? And now looking back, I'm like, oh, that didn't work out for a reason. So this could work out.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. Like, you enjoyed it while you were in there though? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was in the same boat. Like I didn't regret going in, and like it was an amazing experience and I enjoyed it. The reasons for not staying there were outside reasons rather than inside reasons.
Yeah, no, same here. Completely relate to that.
Yeah. And so after that, then you decided to then go into coaching, was it, or were you kind of in a little bit of a limbo between that?
Yeah, I was already 3 years into the fitness industry when I went into the Marines.
Ah, okay.
So I felt the same way almost. I was almost in a strength and conditioning gym. I reached my ceiling. I couldn't get any higher.
Yeah.
So I thought the Marines or the police service, which were the two choices I had, were great for career progression
Hmm.
because it was something I could see climbing up the ladder.
Yeah.
Whereas where I was at the time had a ceiling. So I went into that thinking that was going to be a career. When I came out, because I was still doing fitness in the Marines, when I came out, I didn't even want to think about fitness.
Yeah.
Um, so instead of going straight back into the gym, I pretty much worked in a call center for 12 months, went to work in a suit every day. And it was just amazing. Like I had the best time working in a call center because I just wanted to get out of
Yeah.
that kind of like fitness mindset a little bit.
Yeah.
And obviously eventually I got the passion back and then went back into the fitness industry.
Isn't it funny though that them little like decisions that you make along the way probably add up to what you end up doing? Or like if you never went in there, you probably never would have been introduced to long distance running, and you wouldn't be helping people with that now. And I'm sure even being in the call center as well helped you with like what people probably don't know about working in the fitness industry is that it's a lot of kind of having conversations with people, being able to deal with rejection, being able to communicate with people, all these skills that you don't really learn in your personal training search. You kind of have to learn on the go, or just learn from life experience, and like all them things add up.
Yeah, no, I always say, if you're doing in-person stuff, whether that's coaching or personal training, like it's 80% communication, like you could know everything, you could be the most knowledgeable PTs in the world, and I'm sure we've worked with those people. But if you can't communicate that across to someone who's general population, if that's who you're working with, you're not gonna relay that and they're not gonna be able to take it in. So yeah, it's so hugely communication based.
Going on to actual running and coaching and helping people. So I just wanted to go through like a couple different kind of things that like, there'll be people listening to this podcast now who might be, running their first 5K or training for their first half marathon or, like I think like running is trendy at the moment.
Oh, it is.
It's so trendy at the moment. I never because I was always into running. I always enjoyed running like from early on. But I never expected it to be a trendy thing like it is now. So for those who are kind of jumping on the trend, which I'm all for, I want it, everyone I think should be running. If someone was, let's say, they had never ran before, they're training for, let's say, their first 5K or their first 10K or whatever it is, like what advice would you usually give to kind of novice runners?
Yeah, I think on the back of that, it's definitely great because obviously my passion's in running, and I think a lot of it stemmed from lockdown, and it's people understood the kind of there's so many pros to running, and being able to just go for a run as and when you want, essentially, and you get some fresh air with that. I think is probably why it's so trendy. People just understand it a little bit
Yeah.
more
But it's so it's Instagrammable now,
now.
whereas before it wasn't.
I think in lockdown, I remember there was like I want to say it was for mental health, but it was like 5 for 5 or something, and people were posting their runs and like with a picture of their hand. Like I can't really
Yes,
remember.
that's what it was. It was with a picture of their hand. Yeah, 5 for 5. I remember.
But yeah, no, I think for novice runners, it really depends on their training history. As you know, in the sort of coaching element, I think it depends, is going to be my answer for the most part. But it depends on their training history. It depends if they've had a break from running. But for
Mhm.
most people, it's going to suit to do intervals, because one, it stops putting so much pressure on themselves.
Yeah.
Like you've probably, if they've got Strava or they've been speaking to their mates or a work colleague and they know that their mate's doing 5K in this time, and then they go out for a 5K and they do it 10 minutes slower than, their friend, it's going to be disheartening from the start. So
Yeah.
what I would say is one, try and obviously avoid that comparison if you can, which is easier said than done. But bringing in intervals means that you're breaking it up so you're not putting as much pressure on yourself. You're getting used to running and you're getting used to being outdoors. And you're probably not going to be able to compare that interval run to Dave, who's running like a 15-minute 5K down the road.
Mhm. Can you give an example of intervals for someone who might not understand the terminology?
Yeah, so intervals is essentially when you do a work period, whether that's 30 seconds or whether that's 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and then you have a little bit of a rest, so 1 to 2 minute rest, for example, and then you pretty much just repeat it,
Yeah.
4 or 5 times. And I think that works, but in a timescale perspective from a newcomer to running. Like I like programming like a 5 or a 10 minute continuous run,
Yeah.
very much how Couch to 5K works. A 5 to 10 minute continuous run, you have like a 2 or 3 minute walk, and then you just repeat it.
Yeah, and then because it's timed, it's like it doesn't really matter what the distance is. Just you just keep moving for them. Let's say 20 minutes, where it's 5 minutes running, 3 minutes walking, 5 minutes running, 3 minutes walking.
Yeah, and you just build that up essentially until you get to, a 10, 15 minute continuous run. And you just build on that a little bit rather than thinking, right, because everybody else is, I've just got to go out for a 5K.
Yeah, it's like it's so much more to do with the psychology of it more so than the physicality of it. I mean, like the physicality of it is important as well, but if you feel defeated before you've even started, you're not going to continue on, and therefore you're not going to end up building up that physicality that you need.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with anything, isn't it? Training, work. I think if you don't enjoy something, you're not going to carry on. So you don't want to throw yourself under the bus from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. You said if you're not cross training every week, you're slowing down progress. For those who might not know what cross training is and what it means in regards to getting better at running, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so cross training is essentially any form of training you do in around running. So it could be rowing, it could be playing netball, it could be going to the gym and lifting weights. Anything essentially that's going to get the heart rate up a little bit, improve fitness, and just get a little bit of a sweat on in the process around running. So what I mean by that is one, it's going to be really good for enjoyment, as we're talking about enjoyment. It's going to be good to mix it up and not have to rely on just running.
Mm.
We know that it's just going to be more enjoyable because then you get access to more communities, you get access to other things. If you get a running injury, guess what? You can still train if you've already picked something else up.
Mm.
Um, what it's doing is improving that aerobic fitness for running. So you're increasing your aerobic fitness whilst you're doing cross training. If you're doing the gym as your cross training method, then you're getting stronger in the process, which is going to give you a better base to work from. Um, but it all boils down to the fact that it's all going to complement your running because it's increasing your fitness,
Yes. Yes.
which you need to be able to run.
Do you think there's a lot to be said for things like spin classes or boxercise and things that kind of if you're running, but let's say it's impacting the joints running on the hard concrete and stuff like that, that you can still get your heart rate up without it being too impactful on the joints.
Yeah, the most common reasons runners get injured, especially new runners, is because they do too much too soon.
Yeah,
Because running is like the most impact-based sport there is because
yeah.
it's just like you said, it's just repetitive motion on the concrete, step after step after step. That can take a toll on knees, ankles, hips. So if you're implementing something like spin, swimming, boxing, it's gonna still elevate the heart rate a little bit, still improve your fitness, but without the extra repetitive nature of sort of smashing your joints.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might make the misconception of, okay, I'm training for my first half marathon, so I just need to be out on the road, 6, 7 times a week.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really common, and I get it because running, especially when you're training for half marathons and full marathons, it can take up a lot of time.
Mm.
So, some people aren't as privileged as us, shall I say, where we've got a little bit more time to train and it's our business. So I completely get that not everybody has as much time to dedicate towards their training. And you think, right, the time I've got, I want to put towards my running. The problem with that is if you're not strengthening everything up around it and sort of, doing a bit of recovery, working on your sleep, your nutrition, you're going to fall short because you're going to give yourself more chance of getting injured. And
Mm.
that's not a good thing when you either like running or you're training for something. The one thing you want to avoid is getting injured.
Yes. And you spoke about weight training there. Do you think weight training is quite important when it comes to making sure that you prevent injury while getting out and getting your kilometers in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly biased because my business is strength training for runners. So clearly I'm going to say yes, but there's a reason why I do that because it's my background and because I'm so passionate about the fact that the stronger we get, the more robust we're making our bodies. So yes, there's performance benefits to getting stronger to running, like improved lower body strength, neuromuscular coordination and stuff like that. But the main thing is we want to build a more robust body because of the repetitive action of running. So I would never ever say that anything can prevent your injury, right? Because it just can't.
Yeah.
But what it's gonna do is just minimize your injury risk because you're building a stronger body to work from.
Yeah, give yourself a chance. You said if you're running more than 20 kilometers per week, I doubt that you want to be spending hours in the gym. So can you give a little bit of advice to runners who, they want to improve their performance, they probably don't want to get injured, but they're probably not that into the gym either.
Yeah, but for some context, just to give you a bit of context
Yeah.
on that, I've never really enjoyed going to the gym. And this is coming from a PT who's been a PT for 13 years and worked in gyms for 7, 8 years of that. I don't like going to the gym. Um, so for me, as a runner who likes getting their heart rate up there, likes getting a sweat on, so I've loved hit circuits and why I love running. I get bored really easily in the gym, no matter what I'm doing.
3 minute rest times on the leggings stuff
Ah,
isn't
man,
your ideal Sunday afternoon.
just not built for runners. But on a time management perspective, if you're training for a half marathon, you are doing 20K a week. The last thing you want to be doing is spending hours in the gym. And I think that puts people off from the start because they think, I just haven't got the time to do it, so I'm not going to do it. Whereas if you're in the gym for 20 to 30 minutes and you're doing 2 sessions a week, for example, that are 20 to 30 minutes each, you're getting 60 minutes of good work in there, but you just have to make sure that the quality of that work you're getting in is really good.
Mm.
To give some context on that, I would always go full body to start with. I know a lot of runners that do lower body days. That's usually people with a lot of training experience that aren't necessarily going to get a load of DOMs, so it's not going to affect their runs the next day.
Mm.
I'd usually go full body, and I just make sure that you're doing movements efficiently. You're working on time under tension. For those that don't know, that just means that you're slowing down the reps and you're not going too quickly, because as runners, we have a tendency to do things too quickly. So you go in slow, you stick into those rest periods, and you're working muscle groups that are beneficial to running.
Makes sense. What would be some muscle groups that are beneficial to running, would you say? If you were to, let's say, give some standard exercises for a full body session for people who are listening to this who, might not know, might not have an app, might not have a personal trainer, so like even just a little bit of context in terms of exercise selection would be nice for them.
Yeah, I think to go back to, my strength and conditioning roots, I still think push, pull, squat, hinge is a really good place to start. And that, for people who don't know, your push would be, training your chest and your shoulders somewhat. Your pull would be training your back. Your hinge would be training your hamstrings and your back. And then your squat would be training quads, glutes, and sort of thighs and everything else. So I think sticking to that method still works because you're making sure that you are making the most out of each session. People will say that lower body is more important when it comes to specifics for running.
Mm.
I agree, but I also disagree somewhat because we run with our arms, and I think people forget that. So if you've got a really strong lower body and you almost haven't got the power and strength in your upper body, coordination wise is just going to be off a little bit. So your
Mm.
legs are ticking over, but your arms just can't keep up because you haven't got the strength and endurance in them. So yes, lower body is going to be better, but upper body is also going to be important. So I think it depends on the individual, but for most people, you're going to have a form of push in there. So it could be like a bench press or a chest press, something like that, or a press up. A pull as a dumbbell row or a lat pull down, a hinge, a deadlift, or a swing, or like a glute bridge. And then you've got your squat, lunge, or step ups as a sort of quad and glute dominant exercise.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to then realize that, oh, I might only need actually four exercises and I've covered all bases. And like when we're talking about people that don't want to be in the gym or don't have that much time available to them to be able to just go in and get four exercises done and get out of there, and that's going to keep it ticking over and keep you robust. Like that's surely a win-win.
I mean, do you see that as well? I think there's something to say for like overwhelm. We've all got so much going on in our lives already. And when you add running into the mix, sometimes if people know they've got 7 or 8 movements to do, they're like, do you find that with your sort of clients?
Absolutely. Like even myself personally, let's say
Yeah.
I've on the laptop all day, I've had a really, really busy week and I know my body's aching to just kind of move a little bit more. Like, and I know I haven't, exercised most of the week. I'm like, I'm just gonna go in and I'm just gonna do a full body
Yeah.
session. I'm gonna pick four exercises is just gonna make me feel better and then kind of get out of there because like I don't have time to be doing a push pull legs twice a week,
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think in terms of efficiency, in terms of kind of overwhelm, whether that's your times consumed by training for a half marathon or a marathon, or your times consumed by looking after the kids, or you're swamped in work, I think it's just a really nice type of a split to keep you consistent without again, like you said, overwhelming the person.
Yeah, and I think on that it's almost a case of like when you are in the gym and going through the motions, you almost want to just get the most out of it, and think social media plays a part in that. You see these crazy reels that people are doing like 20 exercises that are like what, and then you think you have to do that as well.
Like they were like 20 exercises for one muscle group or something like that. That
Yeah,
absolute overkill for, Jessica who's only training twice a week and running. It's
poor
it's it's
Jessica.
insane.
Yeah.
You also talked about tempo running. So for people that don't understand what tempo running is or why that would be beneficial to their training, could you explain that a little bit?
Tempo running is essentially a form of speed work. So you could have intervals and you could have tempos almost in the same bracket. And it's called a tempo run because you're playing with different tempos, which is, I guess, a more sciencey sciencey term for you just playing with different speeds.
Yeah.
Like fartlek training as well, but a little bit different. Tempo would mean going out for, say, a 10K run, and it would mean doing, say, 3K at like an easy pace. So you want to be able to hold a conversation with the person next to you. That's how you know that it's an easy run. Then you'd have maybe like a 2K section in the middle that is a little bit faster.
Mhm.
If you want to make it specific, if there's a certain pace that you want to be running your half marathon for, you'd almost make that 2K specific to your half marathon pace.
Mm.
Then you'd obviously do, say, a 6K easy to finish. There's a few different ways of doing it. You can do it with time, you can do it with distance, but all it means is you're hitting a certain pace within that run. And
Yeah.
then you mix and match in easy to hard, essentially.
Makes sense. So for people, I think we should stick with a half marathon run preparation because I think that's what a lot of people are doing these days, are challenging themselves to do. So like in regards to, let's say it's a half marathon you're training for, how would people know whether to, just go out and run as fast as you can for that? Just go out and do a tempo run. Should I just be training like doing 10K every time I run? Like how should people who are listening to this podcast just be like, how do I prep myself for this 21-kilometer run? And how many runs a week should I do? And which ones should I do really slow? Which ones should I do really fast?
Yeah.
Because like sometimes all that information can confuse someone more than help them.
Yeah, there's so much stuff out there, and some of it is conflicting, but it all follows, the same sort of principle. I think the 80-20 ratio that is spoken about quite a lot is a really good place to start. And I think that's for training in general, I guess. Like 80% there or thereabouts of your runs want to feel relatively easy. 20% is probably where you're going to be doing your speed work or a bit more intensity. I think that's more important than how many runs you're doing or what specific runs you're doing, because then everything else kind of makes sense. I think 3 runs a week is, pretty much baseline for a lot of people training for a half marathon. If you're a more experienced runner, then you can probably do 4 or 5 runs a week, and it depends on your time as well, right? So I think starting with like an easy run, which is what I always do as almost the foundational run. And as we just spoke about, the way to know that it's easy is to be able to hold a conversation with the person next to you whilst you're running. And that you could do, a 5K. What I like to do, as we spoke about before, one of the pros of doing time-based runs is you're not going to compare it to Jessica, because we've already said it, Jessica down the road, who's absolutely rapid and she's running a 5K in an obscene time. So I think a 30 to 35 minute easy run is just a really good baseline run for like anybody on any specific running program or any goal. Because it stops that comparison. You're still going to work that aerobic fitness. And it's just nice to be able to go out for a 30, 35 minute run without thinking about intensity. In the middle of that, you probably want to be doing a speed work session, which is your hard session every week, which could be intervals, like we said at the start. It could be a track session, or it could be, I wouldn't say you need to really worry about a tempo run until you get, deep into a half marathon block. But
Mm.
intervals is just a really good place to start as your 20% intense session. And then for most people, it's going to benefit to have a long run on the weekend, which will be the way to get your mileage up, will be the way to prep you for 21K. And that could be anywhere from, a 10 to 15K run over the weekend.
Yes, makes sense. What about recovery? So obviously there'll be people training for half marathons, and they'll start to feel that, oh my God, my hips are really tight, my
Yeah.
lower back is starting to pain me, I'm getting shin splints. Tell me a little bit about what people can do for that.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be that coach, but like sleep and nutrition is just going to be rule number one. There's no point in jumping in ice baths, getting in saunas if you haven't got your sleep and nutrition locked down. Doesn't mean you're not going to get any benefit from it, but I would always prioritize sleep and nutrition from terms of recovery. You're doing more miles, you're training for longer usually, so your body just needs to adapt to that, and it takes time. You're going to be aching. There's no two ways about it. So sleep and nutrition, once that is locked down, you just want to make sure that you're managing your intensity, which is where the 80-20 ratio comes in. You want to make sure that you are keeping round about 80% of your runs at an intensity so you don't have to be in recovery mode. Um, and then, yeah, you're looking into like stretching and mobility. Like we know there's not an awful lot of science that says stretching and mobility does much, but I think that's just personal preference. I think the looser we get our muscles and from a mental standpoint,
Mm.
mobility and stretching in between runs can be beneficial from a mental standpoint for a lot of runners for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's something where like a lot of people who are evidence-based, they kind of forget that is like, well, if it makes someone feel better, then, allow them to have it, even if
Worth it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so in terms of that 80/20 rule, I remember hearing about that years ago when I started running, and I was like, oh, that's really genius. Like 80% of your, I think I heard it as like 80% of your runs at 60% effort, and 20% of your runs at like 80 to 100% effort. And I was like, that's so good. And I always think about the 80/20 rule in terms of nutrition, like 80% of your meals, like whole foods, 20%, fun foods, what you enjoy. But I almost forgot about that in terms of running. I think it's so simplistic, but it makes people get it straight away.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I'm not saying that it needs to be 80/20. You could
Yeah.
do 85/15, or you could do 75/25. Is that right? My maths is awful. Like you could go anywhere around. Like the main consensus of that is getting people's heads around the fact that they want more of their runs to be easy than hard,
Yes. Yeah.
which is the opposite of usually where people start and probably why they just hate running
Yeah.
because they're going, balls to the wall as soon as they get out the door.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I actually find myself like someone who's supposed to be experienced in knowing this stuff. That like if I like if I'm the coach myself, there is no coaching, and I'm like, right, I have to do a 5K. Right, get the fastest time for Strava so
Yeah.
everyone can see how fast you can run. Like I think everyone, even professionals, can fall into that trap.
Oh, and I mean, what do you mean as well? That you mean some weeks you get like your nutrition's kind of not on the 80/20. Mine definitely doesn't follow that trend
Yeah,
some weeks.
I don't
So
know.
it's just life, isn't it? We're humans.
Yeah, I think so. For having that structure though, it's a really good really good rule of thumb. And then in terms of shin splints and stuff like that, would you say that kind of, because that's a thing that I hear people talk about a lot. Would you say that also comes down to, okay, probably the intensity is too high, or you're doing too much too soon, or too much volume too soon?
Yeah, no, it could be a few things. And firstly, like disclaimer, I'm definitely not a physio, but
Yeah,
I've got a physio that I almost send my runners to, which is great.
yeah,
But I think usually with shin splints, it's either to do with footwear
yeah,
or it's to do with yeah, like over mileage or over intensity.
yeah.
I think it could usually be down to those two things. Yeah.
Do you have any advice on footwear in terms of people what not to wear compared to what to wear?
Yeah, don't wear carbon plated shoes for your easy 30-minute run. Save those for race day. But the idea of trainers, like there's a lot of information out there at the moment, which is great. And all of the shops, I think I'm quite lucky here. Hopefully, wherever the person listening to this has local running shops
Mm,
that has some really good staff working there, and they can explain to you the difference between like a daily runner or like a race day runner.
mm.
And the general consensus is your daily running trainer is going to have a decent amount of cushion in the heel because it's going to save a lot of the impact that running creates. So it's going to save your joints. Carbon plated shoes and race day shoes aren't going to have much cushion because you can go faster, so they're lighter.
It makes
If
sense.
you wear those every day, which I genuinely see people out and about wearing their carbon plated shoes when they're quite obviously going for like a 20K long run with a backpack on, it's going to absolutely destroy like your joints because you've
Yes.
got no cushion. So there's not really, a specific brand that I would recommend. I think I get all of my runners to go and get their gait analyzed. It sounds scientific, but it's honestly a lot of places will give you a free gait analysis if you buy a pair of trainers from them.
Yeah.
And you only ever have to do that once.
Yeah.
And all it'll do is it'll assess your gait, it'll do a little video, it'll see how you run, and they'll be like, the Hokers are really good for you because they're a wide base trainer. And
Mm,
if you know that, you can base your running trainer choices on that information.
makes sense. And what I used to always think, or my thought perception was, let's say on race day, you should kind of keep everything as similar as possible. So your nutrition should be similar. You know, wear the same gear that you would usually wear because it's going to feel comfortable. So you don't have any like, if you can replicate your training to your race day performance as much as possible, like that's going to be a net positive. But do you think in terms of runners, that could be that swap that you could kind of get away with it because it's going to help with performance?
Yeah, I mean, you could always take, your race day trainers, your carbon plates, if you wanted to do it for like a 10-minute spin, 15-minute
Yeah,
sprint, so you're used to running in them. It's not a case of you just have them for race day.
yeah, yeah.
All
But
I'm
you're not
all I
overly using them.
You're not overly using them because one, they're super expensive,
Yeah.
and two, they'll just destroy your ankles and hips if you like run in them a lot. So yeah, still sort of practice before it and go out in them even if you're wearing them around the house, just so you know how it feels,
Mm,
um, rather than just having them out on race day.
makes sense. And in terms of nutrition, what advice would you give to runners? Let's say on race day, like what you let's say we'll stick to the 21K, the half marathon one. So what would you suggest in terms of nutrition in the morning? What you should be having before a race, during a race, after a race?
I was actually speaking to someone about this yesterday, and I think because there's so much going on social media at the moment about protein, 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 and we know like people are probably under eating protein. So like we're trying to push people to eat more protein because it's going to be beneficial for health, for weight loss, etc., etc. So I was speaking to someone yesterday, and they were like, "What? I shouldn't be having like a protein shake and some yogurt before I go out for a run." I'm like, no, but like who's how can I expect you to know that without having this conversation? So I think before a run or any run, the form of food that you want is carbohydrates because the carbohydrates are obviously our energy supply. More importantly than that, you just want food that you're used to, which is what you've already said about because there's nothing worse than going on a sort of run, especially if you're racing. You've tried something new and you feel like you're going to crap yourself like 5K in. That's just not a nice feeling. So I think one, you just want to make sure it's almost good for your stomach. And that goes for like gels and stuff that runners use. You don't want to be using different gels on race day without trying them in training
Yeah.
because who knows what it could do to your stomach. So one, it would mean have a food that's going to sit well in your stomach. Two would just be make sure it's a carbohydrate source. Things to avoid are just anything dairy almost and anything with a bit of spice. Usually a long run or races are going to be in the mornings. So let's focus on breakfast. I swear by just having bagels, jam, and sliced banana on
I was gonna ask you, what's your go-to meal, knowing what your go-to meal is, because I see you put it
it.
up all the time.
Yeah, like I'll have porridge sometimes, but a lot of people, because there's milk in porridge, it won't sit well in their stomach. So
Yeah.
I'd need to give it more time. But yeah, that for me is almost like gold standard. I know it sits well. It's fast acting carbohydrates. Don't need to look outside of that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing as well, that it's fast releasing carbohydrates rather than having something that's kind of slow releasing if you're about to race.
Yeah.
Uh,
When you were in your training, was
mm,
it a case of like you had to shovel stuff in and then just go on a run straight after it, like 20 minutes after it, or
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so
that got used to my stomach just being able to like have a big meal and 30 minutes later I'm doing like a 20K, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. You also speak a lot on your page about like, okay, while running can have all these benefits in terms of, you feeling physically stronger, you're feeling fitter, it can help even with body composition and stuff like that. But you also really advocate the mental side, the mental perspective that running can give to people. And I think that's a metric that kind of gets lost when people are training for performance and training for races, but then they don't actually realize how mentally better they feel, like having purpose to their week or structure to their week by just getting out and running.
Yeah. I think on that, running is hard. Like running is hard as most things are when it comes to training. So I think initially getting over that barrier of doing something that you couldn't. So if you struggle to run 1K continuous at the start, and now all of a sudden you're doing 5K, who cares what time you're doing a 5K? But the fact you can run a continuous 5K now without stopping compared to where you were, so you're already more confident and you've already almost got over that initial barrier. So that gives you confidence, that can help with your mental health. I think one of the massive benefits to me personally, and why I advocate running so much, is because you're getting vitamin D regardless of the weather. Like I've got a really nice sunny Cardiff at the moment,
I know
which
I've seen some videos. I was like, looks unbelievable.
it's really nice. And I'm down the bay, which is like, so I'm overlooking the marina here, and
Yeah.
it's stunning. So I think regardless of the weather, you're always going to get that vitamin D hit, which we know is really good for mental health. Alongside that, you're moving your body. So you're getting endorphins, you're getting a feel good factor, you're getting a sweat. When you combine those two together, I think just something magic happens when you're doing it daily or when you're doing it 3, 4 times a week. So that for me is almost how it works. Why it works is because I just find my mind just kind of wanders. When you get to a certain level of running and it feels good and it feels nice, and you get runs that feel not nice, but if you are sticking to kind of like an 80-20 ratio, let's say, 60, 70% of your runs should feel good. And you almost just get like an instant mental health kick when you're outside. Sometimes you got the fresh air and you're just into a bit of, people call it flow state, don't they?
Mm.
And I think to be able to get to that is where that mental health improvement can be sort of massively linked to running.
And then also like if you flip it that because now that you notice them benefits, then you start going out running for the mental benefits rather than the performance benefits, and then the performance improves as a
Yeah.
byproduct of you just actually going out and doing something that you enjoy.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, like, why don't you race? Like, I've never done an event, so
Mm.
I've never done like a half marathon or a marathon. And I don't race actively at the moment.
Yeah.
And people say, why don't you race? And I just say because it's not why I run.
Mm.
Um, it's like it genuinely like running started for performance benefits, and then I realized the mental health benefits, and it got me through a lot of tough times. So it's almost like that's why I run.
Yeah, I only started racing last year. I only did my first half marathon. I've done like six since then, and I ran one marathon. But I would never been able to do them if I didn't go out running for the reasons that I actually started, which was I just wanted to get out of the house and get out of my head. And I just for like 10, 12 years maybe I was just out running just for the purpose of running. I didn't even have headphones or Strava or
Yeah,
Map My Run or any of them things. No
at my
gimmicks.
run. Wow.
Yeah. I probably couldn't do it now. Like I always run with headphones and earphones now, but when I was younger, I used to never do it, and it used to never bother me. And I was like I found it for the mental health benefits of it, and then I think everything else just fell into that as a byproduct.
I think it's great because generationally, we got brought up. People started running, or the majority of people start running because they want to lose weight. They thought it was the only way they could lose weight. Now, with all this information available and social media, people realize that running isn't the only way to lose weight. So I think a lot of people are starting because, yes, they want to get fitter and healthier, but also because they know it's going to improve their mental health because
Yeah.
of all the research on that,
Yeah.
which can only be a good thing for
Yeah,
sure.
it's such a more positive reason to be getting out and going for a jog outside rather than the old way of thinking. And then obviously on top of that, then that obviously probably contributes as well to this rise that we have in run clubs and stuff like that. And you've probably seen on my Instagram like I'm a big advocate of community and social health and socializing. So what do you think of the rise in popularity of run clubs at the moment? I know you do like is it like a 6 week running phase you do when you go out in groups and run outside, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've got my own run club,
Yeah.
but coming from like a performance and a results based background, and the fact that I'm not overly social when I run, so
Yeah.
I was like, do you know what? Let's create a run club that is almost like a 6 week run club course
Yeah.
specific to a set goal, whether that's a 5K or a 10K. And all I do is basically do intervals like in person. So we meet up early Tuesday morning. They are absolute warriors, to be fair. 6 o'clock every Tuesday morning. We do intervals. So we do like sprints across the sort of barrage.
Cool.
That's our in-person session. And they almost get a program to go along with that.
Mm.
So my run club is different to a lot of run clubs, but that's why I created it. I think the good thing about run clubs is they're bringing more communities together. I struggled with the fact that a lot of people were going to run clubs and felt intimidated because they felt they had to keep up with the pace
Yes.
and they were almost getting left behind, which is again one of the reasons why I created my run club with the fact that our phrase is no one left behind.
Love that.
I want to be able for runners who aren't that confident to come through and not feel like they're going to be left behind or not feel like they're slowing down the pack. So I think there's a few negatives and a few cons that some run clubs have with them, that they're only appealing to a certain amount of people, and then people are almost afraid to go because of that. But if it's bringing more people together and it's getting more people running, I only see it as a massive net positive for
Yeah,
sure.
it makes sense. I think it's like everything. It's less about the idea, but the approach behind the idea. And I think some people can approach these things better because they have more knowledge and more experience and kind of understand where you can create something that everyone kind of thrives and progresses, and then like like other people can do it in a way where they're not that experienced, and again people can feel left behind.
Yeah, I think a lot of run clubs are made by people that almost aren't coaches. So they haven't got that base of like, you need to be able to cater for your slowest member and your fastest member. Like, you need to give them the same experience.
Yeah, there,
And I
there
think,
has to there has to be self-awareness for that to happen, and
I
some people
think
don't have it.
Yeah, I think most coaches understand that, but a lot of run clubs these days are made by people that just enjoy running, which is great. But the flip side of that can be the fact that they're not aware that people feel like they're either slowing down the pack or they feel like they're faster than everybody else.
Yeah, it makes sense. Um, I wanted to ask you a couple other questions, more so kind of just broader questions and just kind of your perspective on coaching in general. So, like after 13, is it 13 years of coaching you've been doing now? Yeah. So, like
Yeah.
after 13 years of coaching, what do you think you've learned about the job that you could pass on to maybe less experienced coaches or people just getting involved in the industry for the first time?
Yeah, I think I actually shared something on Instagram the other day from Craig Massey, who always posts some really good stuff. And I think the number one rule that I feel like it's easy to lose and easy to lose sight of now because of social media. And we were on the same mentorship, so I know we can speak about this, but there's so much pressure on hitting certain numbers when it comes to like how much you're bringing home and how much you're earning and stuff like that, that there's so much pressure on coaches that they forget to actually think about what their job is as a coach rather than think about the numbers. So rule number one would just be to like be the best coach you can. Try not to think about numbers too much. Yes, it's a business, so numbers will matter if you're self-employed for sure. But I think being the best coach you can, and a lot of that is to do with communicating with your client, whether that's online or in person. Like, ask them what they want, probe them, like speak to them as a human being, don't be robotic, like be yourself. Like, I think if there's one thing I could say is just be yourself. Because like people buy from people, right? And if they're not sort of investing in you, they might just be doing it because maybe you've got a good Instagram or you post some good stuff, but they're not necessarily doing it for the right reasons because they're not investing in you. People that stick around and they want to get coached by you will be the people that you have a really good relationship with. And it all boils down, in my opinion, to that relationship you make with the client. You could say that, and I understand that it's a business, so you do need to be hitting the numbers. But in my experience, if you be the best coach you can, you open up more doors for yourself, you open up more opportunities, um, and you get a really good reputation.
Yeah, yeah, and if you if you destroy your reputation because you're not really interested in helping people, then like once you lose your reputation, you can't get it back.
Yeah, and we say it to our clients, but it's like understanding your why. You know, for most people, they don't get into coaching because they think they can earn loads of money. A little bit different now with online coaching and the way you see social media because people put it out there. But I think for most people, if you wanted to earn loads of money, you probably wouldn't be in the fitness industry.
Yeah.
And
And I,
so,
I think I see that you see that happening a lot between the trainers who are there because they like helping people and the trainers who are there to make lots of money. They just end up transitioning as business coaches anyway, because they don't stay as fitness trainers because they never really gave a shit about training people anyway. They just were there to try and make as much money as possible. So then they're like, all right, I'm gonna transition to something else now.
yeah, and like I could say something really, really sort of sciencey, like just keep up skilling and never stop learning and stuff like that. But I think you just want to keep that fire within your belly for like helping someone else
Yeah,
do some pretty cool shit.
yeah.
And like you just want to try to maintain that, and that comes with helping people, building relationships, them giving you good feedback, you giving them good feedback, and just that relationship that you have with people.
Yeah, it's all about actually kind of just wanting to help people, I think, and doing the best you can with that. And I always use a line that, be like working in the you're not going to make it in the fitness industry if you're into fitness. It's not about being into fitness, it's about being
Yeah.
into people. It's because that's what
Yeah.
you're doing. You're serving other people, not yourself.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You've obviously then worked with a lot of people from kind of all walks of life in that time. So what do you think you've learned about people in general from your time as a coach?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will tell you when you first come into the industry to sort of like maintain those boundaries and professionalism, and I get that almost, but for people to for people to open up to you and sort of communicate more, which is where we know it stems from, you need to open up a little bit to them. So you need to show more of that. If you're pretending to be someone else, they're not going to open up to you. So I think communication will always, always, always be the biggest thing. But as far as what I've learned from other people, I think it's that everybody is just more capable than they could ever imagine. And your job as a coach, or one of your jobs as a coach, is to almost get that out of them, like get it from them so they can implement it, whether it's from a nutrition, a training, a performance sense, a mental health sense. I think our jobs as coaches, as well as building relationship, is to improve people's lives. So everybody's just a lot more capable than they could ever imagine. And if you can let them see that, I think that's just massive because then they can see that the sort of possibilities and opportunities are endless within fitness.
Yeah, I always think about like that even in terms if we're talking about from like a running perspective. Like when I ran my first marathon there, it was the longest distance I ever did, which was the 42K. And after I did it in last summer, I was like, oh shit, what else can I do? Do you know what I mean? It was that like that limiting belief, and then it was like breaking through uncomfortable barriers where I was doubting myself to it's like, oh, if I can do that, what else am I capable of doing that I haven't actually been, backing myself to do? And I think seeing that in a client as well, whether it's they tell themselves that they're not a runner and then they go for their first 5K run, or they tell themselves that they're just not a gym person, and but then they go into the gym and they start training and now they feel better, and like they start lifting weights they didn't think they could, and they feel more confident. It's like, oh my God, I'm more capable than I thought I was. And how that can ripple into other areas of their life that isn't just fitness, whether that's family life or business or
Yeah.
self-development in any way. I think it's probably the one of the best things about that type of work.
That's a really good point as well, because it's not about telling people, look, you could do this, you can do that. It's about showing people and letting them experience like lifting up that weight that they never thought was possible. And then you don't have to tell them because they've just proved to themselves that they've done it.
Yeah, yeah, and like at some point that has to come from action as well, because you can tell yourself, oh, I believe myself to do it, but not really believe it, or you don't believe it. But if you do the thing, you do the thing.
Yeah, I love the way you say that.
You said something that I really enjoyed. You said winning isn't everything, but wanting to win is. I thought that was a really, really good quote. Can you elaborate on that in terms of what it means or what it means to you?
Yeah, For me, it's the process. It's the process of doing stuff that is hard and you wanting to win. And this isn't wanting to win against other people. This is wanting to win against who you were last year, who you were 5 years ago. I think there's real value in looking at the process of whatever that goal is, whether it's business, training, running, and wanting to win, wanting to be better than yourself. Even if you get to that goal, get to that race, get to that body weight target, and you don't hit it, the fact that you've wanted to get there has made the process so much more valuable. And let's be honest, it's almost like the journey, without sounding super cheesy, the journey is where the progress happens and where the sort of where the happiness comes, because it's bringing that into part of it. So I think if you're constantly wanting to win, wanting to be better than you were 2 years ago to who you were yesterday, the process just becomes so much more enjoyable. Um,
Mm.
there's some really good sort of things from like Olympic athletes who've won Olympic golds and stuff, and they always say about once they've won a gold, it's like they've reached their lowest point when they've won that gold, because like what's next?
Yeah, what I think it's called gold medal syndrome or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And that's I think that's where it comes from, you know. And I mean I use gold and I said winning isn't everything. They've clearly won, so maybe I should have used bronze. Or fifth. But yeah, it's the fact that even if you haven't reached your goal, it's the fact that you wanted to reach your goal. So it gave you a, what's the word that I'm looking for? It gave you a purpose. It
Yeah.
gave you a purpose to get up in the morning and put your shoes on and get out the door.
Do you think that's what people get wrong about progress is that they're very hyper fixated on the outcome and not who they're becoming in the process of pursuing that goal?
Yeah, and I can actually relate that to that myself.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at like goal setting long term. I find it quite overwhelming, and where people are like, "Where do you want to be in like 3 years?" I'm like, honestly, I'm just looking like 3 weeks ahead or 3 months ahead. I've never been a massive goal setter, so I think a lot of people are almost instilled the fact that they have to have this golden 6 month goal. I've never worked that way, so I relate to that in the fact that I find it difficult to think about that. And it definitely hasn't held me back when it comes to like making progress, whether that's with my running, the business, training, life. So yeah, I think there's definite method within that like statement for sure.
Yeah. Do you think that it can almost be a more beneficial way of thinking about things and thinking about life in terms of like you want to have ambition, so like goal setting or trying to achieve these things or finishing your first race, like that's all well and good, but also like trying to balance that ambition with like also appreciating the everyday now and where you are regardless of where you are, trying to be grateful for where you are and what you have, but also kind of striving for more and being ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, the magic you're looking for is found in your daily routine, right? And I think that that kind of sums it up. The fact that we're looking at our daily routine and we're figuring that out and we're trying to improve that. And in that, that's going to affect 2 weeks down the line. It's going to affect 4 weeks down the line. So I think if sometimes we look at the sort of the day-to-day stuff we're doing, that could massively benefit what's going on in long term rather than just thinking about that 6 month goal all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like your days end up making up your life, so making sure that you're
Make
successful
them
every
count.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's one lesson that running or training has taught you, that goes far beyond fitness?
Trying to use a different phrase to what I used with one thing I've learned about other people, but I honestly think it's the same thing. It's told me that my body and mind is just so much more capable than what I could ever imagine. And that sounds super cheesy, but that is honestly the overbearing thing, um, is the fact that you never know your limits until you're actually, pushing them every week, and getting there. Whereas I think a lot of people maybe that don't run, they don't train, they haven't almost reached that point where they're like, I am literally on my hands and knees trying to breathe right now. I'm but I'm a lot better than I was, six months previously.
Do you think that by, doing them things, like doing them difficult things physically, that has helped you in terms of backing yourself being self-employed and, etc.?
Yeah, there's definite turnover to that because, people say that if you lift some heavy stuff off the floor, in the weights room, for example, that's just going to mean that you're able to put stuff on your back and move forwards, whether that's traumas, whether that's family stuff, whether that's business, whether that's work, whether that's life. I think there's so much turnover and compatibility from running and from the gym to getting over hard stuff in your life because it's doing something that you might not necessarily want to do on certain days and doing it anyway because you know it's going to benefit you.
Speaking of hard stuff, I read that you lost your dad in your early 20s. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2021 I was, yeah.
Yeah. So very, very young. For anyone struggling with, grieving the loss of a parent, I also was, I think it was 23 or something like that when my mum passed. Would you have any advice for them in terms of how to cope, essentially?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because I guess it depends on your environment and what you use to cope. Like it's almost where I found fitness. I found running and sort of walking and going to the gym as almost like an outlet. And I'm a bit of a gamer as well, so I wouldn't be doing myself any favors if I didn't say I fell back on my Xbox quite a lot and gamed probably more than I should have. So I probably did what I'm sure you can relate to some way. I probably did what you shouldn't do initially, which was almost lock myself away in a little bubble, not speak to anyone about it. I was offered therapy, I didn't take it, and it was free therapy as well. So I think I did probably what I shouldn't have done at the time, but it was how I coped.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, my advice would be don't let don't let social media or life or anyone in general tell you how you should cope with getting over a trauma. Like you have to figure that out yourself. If it's gonna help to talk, then it's probably going to be beneficial for you talking. But if, like me at that time, it wasn't helping, I didn't force myself to talk. And I think that gets lost sometimes because we are told so much to talk about it. Um, Whereas for some people in some environments and some different situations, it maybe isn't going to help because of the type of person they are. So I guess my advice would be to not let anyone tell you how to handle your trauma. So I'm not going to tell you
Yeah.
how to handle.
It makes complete sense. It's like, on top of grieving, you're also guilting someone into a way of grieving.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously things that you can do to help, and that's nutrition, sleep, train, like get your heart rate up there a little bit.
Mhm.
There's stuff you can do to help, but as far as the kind of mental stuff is do what you need to do in that environment, and you'll pretty much figure out, hopefully, what's going to be the best avenue for you.
Yeah.
Like what was, can you remember how you handled it or what you
I
did?
handle it like poorly. I poured myself into my business at the time, and the business at the time was like running boot camps, and like I was, I think there was times when I was doing like 20 hours of boot camp classes plus like
Oh,
40 hours working in the gym itself, and I got like working like 60 hours a week, and me thinking that was productivity, and what it was really was escapism. And like I ended up like burning the candle out at both ends, where I was like, you know working really hard and building up kind of this business to like 120 members, but then I was also like going out every weekend as well, and like I was just burnt out by the end of it. And then I was like, right, I'm going to Vietnam. And then I flew to Vietnam, and just let the business crumble, basically. But I didn't realize that it was an escapism at the time of it happening. It was only kind of in reflection a couple of years later when I was a little bit older and wiser.
Yeah, and alcohol again, I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't mention that. Like alcohol definitely played a part then as well. I use that as almost like an escapism as well, for sure.
Yeah. What do you have any kind of fondest memories of him before he passed away?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really hard one for me because he was my dad, but he was like my best mate as well. You know, we had such a great relationship, and I'm so grateful for that relationship. Because I know I speak to a lot of people now, and they haven't necessarily got a good relationship with their dad or their mum that had maybe passed away, but I had such a good relationship with him. Like some of my fondest memories are just when me and him are together, just doing stuff, whether that's like racing remote control cars under the underground of Fitness First. They were like petrol engines, and we just used to go at like 11 p.m. at night and run them under Fitness First. And they'd make this crazy like petrol sound and probably wake everybody up. Or just like being in the car with him, listening to music, gaming with him, or just literally quality time with him.
Mm.
And
Do you think that that represented then in you being a big gamer even after he passed away?
No, I think generational wise, I think I had my uncle as well, who was a massive gamer, so I was always going to go down that route. He
Yes.
wasn't as big of a gamer, but it's just something I've always relied upon and really loved. Um,
Is there any is there anything you've learned from him in terms of conversations you had, or even just how he behaved that you kind of replicate now or try to?
I think the most important thing is what I've just mentioned. As a parent, 'cause I've got two kids myself, and I've got, a son and a daughter, but I think my relationship with my son is almost foundational to how my relationship was with my dad. And that is, as I've just said, when you asked what's your fondest memories, it's not that he took me to Florida. It's the fact that like those little moments that don't cost anything
He was
are
present.
the most valuable memories.
Yeah.
So I use that as a parent now and think, okay, so like those were my most valuable, memories when my dad passed. So I want my kids to feel the same. So regardless of financial situation and stuff like that, I always think, do you know what? And I'm obviously split from their mum, so I don't see them all the time. So I'm like, I'm just going to spend quality time with them. Doesn't matter what we're doing. It's just
Mm.
about quality time spent, and I think that's just a relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, that kind of, sums up what it's about. It's like it's not about, what you get them or doing these big grand holidays or anything. It's like the little everyday things, being present, spending quality time because to them it doesn't really matter what it is, but it's the environment that you create with them.
Yeah. What about you? Have you learned?
Yeah, for me, it was probably quite similar in the terms of that. My mom was very much she was very family orientated. She was very much about getting people together to do things. She was very kind of kind and she was very like a real organizer of like, okay, we're all going out to do this thing together. We're all going out to see our auntie or we're all going to the zoo together. And I
Yeah.
think it's only as I've gotten older now where like, I talk about social health and social community and stuff like that. And I found that okay, I'm very much like without realizing it, like trying to create kind of social environments where people can spend time together and enjoy each other's company. And I think that was something that my mum did a lot without even realizing it. And I think I've picked that up from her now. A little bit. I'm definitely not as kind or as patient as my mum was. I probably argue with people on the internet far too much to put myself in the same bracket as her. But I definitely kind of picked them things up from her, the importance of family and the importance of, even community. Like she always made time for her friends. She always went for a walk with her friends. Like she'd always be just talking to strangers on the estate. I remember one Christmas, like we had a neighbor who, he was in his 80s and he was living on his own, and we didn't know him. And next minute he's sitting at the table at Christmas dinner with us,
Christmas
and
dinner.
I'm only a young lad, and I'm like, who the fuck is this? And all. And
This is
she's like,
Uncle Ron.
this is like this is Sean. He's sitting with us now. He's gonna have dinner. Like, and that's just how she was. And I think as kids, you kind of you're watching and you're observing, but you don't realize that you're actually taking them things in, and then you notice them more as you're an adult. Then,
Yeah, no, totally. I can definitely see that about you and sort of communities and trying to bring everyone together as much as possible with all the stuff that you're doing.
yeah. Um, any last advice that you want to leave people in terms of their fitness training, in terms of running, in terms of just pursuing their health goals? What kind of advice would you like to leave people with as we wrap up this podcast?
Enjoy it. Like try your best to enjoy it. I think again, it's a bit cheesy, but if there's one thing I've learned in, well, I say 13 years of coaching. I coached football before that, so like 20 years of coaching kids and adults. It's that you're not going to go back to it day after day and start creating some consistency, start creating a better lifestyle if you don't enjoy it somewhat. There's going to be days that you don't enjoy, but for the most part, you want to find something you enjoy, whether that's running, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's rock climbing. I think if it gets you moving and it gets your heart rate up, we know it's going to be beneficial for your physical and mental health. So find something you enjoy. Try as many different things as you can if you haven't found it, and stick with it.
Matt, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your time. I think we should have probably done this a lot sooner, so we'll definitely have to do it again. If people want to keep up with the work that you do, where could they go to find you, to communicate with you, to reach out? Where can they find you?
Instagram's my main platform, so at Matt Jones underscore PT. Everything runs through there. Like I'm quite active on social media through, reels and stories and stuff like that. So yeah, love to connect with people. And massive thanks for having me. I think I'd probably choose to come over to you next time rather than you come here because I want to make a trip over to you. So
All right.
next time we do it, hopefully we'll do it in person as well.
All right. That sounds fantastic. Matt, thank you very much for today, and I'll chat to you soon.